Now, there's some argument in the last couple of years about whether economics really has anything to do with this. And the obvious counter-argument is that it's not necessarily true that poorer people voted in greater number for Donald Trump than richer people. Knowing somebody's income doesn't allow you to predict easily who they voted for. That is all true, but there's a very clear geographic pattern to populist support. And that is true in the United States, in Austria, in Sweden, in Poland, in Hungary, even in countries like India and Turkey. Donald Trump won 2/3 of American counties, but only a little more than 1/3 of America's GDP. He did much better in parts of the country where there's been less recent economic investment, where there's fewer highly qualified people, even where the share of jobs that might be automated away in the coming decades is higher. So that's the first reason. The second reason has to do with culture and identity. If you go back to 1960, in most democracies, the question of who really belongs in this country would have had a very straightforward answer. In Sweden, in Germany, in Italy, people would have said, well, somebody who descends from the same ethnic stock, somebody who's ethnically Swedish or German or Italian. Over the last 50 or 60 years, that has started to change. In Germany, the country where I grew up, it was impossible to become a German citizen by immigrating to the country. It was only by either descent or because you married somebody who's German. Well, that's changed now. Now you can come and immigrate to the country, and if you've lived there for a number of years, you can apply for a passport. That's a legal change. There's a cultural change as well. More and more Germans embrace and even celebrate the fact that obviously some of their compatriots might be brown or black, that they might be Muslim or Hindu. But there's also a big rebellion against that. And in a way that shouldn't surprise us. Imagine somebody who's not the most affluent guy in the country, not the most educated guy in the country, doesn't perhaps command the greatest social respect. It was very tempting for that person to say, well, at least I'm German rather than Italian. And at least I'm part of a majority rather than one of those Turkish guest workers. Right? Well, that Turkish guest worker or his son or grandson might not be your boss. He might not represent you in parliament. And it shouldn't surprise us that some people feel like something that was important to them, some kind of positional social good, is being taken away from them because of that. Now, the situation in the United States and in Canada is both similar and different. It's different in that these societies have always been multi-ethnic in various ways. But it's similar in that there's always been a strict racial and religious hierarchy. And that some people have had great advantages over others by dint of that. Now, we should remember how far we've come in overcoming that. There's no doubt that it's better to be a member of just about any minority in this country today than it would have been 20 or 40 or 60 years ago. Perhaps not 2 years ago, but definitely 20 or 40 or 60 years ago. And we should celebrate that. But it shouldn't surprise us that some of the people who have something to lose from that transformation, who have to give up some of their unearned advantages, may not be so happy about that. The process of transforming mono-ethnic, monocultural societies into multi-ethnic ones, especially equal multi-ethnic ones, is historically unique. We haven't yet done it anywhere. And so we shouldn't get disheartened by the fact that it's a more complicated process than we might perhaps wish. Now, if you have the economic grievances from economic stagnation, sense of economic unfairness, fueling distrust in our politicians and our institutions, if that often takes the form of a kind of cultural backlash, of rising tensions between different ethnic and religious groups, social media is the last addition to this mix that really makes the cocktail explode. 25 years ago, you had a system of communication that was in some ways not so different from what would have been the case 200 or 300 years earlier. Seems like a weird claim because you had CNN broadcasting picture and sound live from around the world. That certainly wasn't possible in 1800. But there was an important commonality, which is that the structure of communication was one to many. You had a few centers and they would broadcast out into the rest of the world. So in order to have a real voice in our society, you had to own a television station, a radio station, a newspaper, a publishing house, or at least be one of the people invited to use and share in that platform. Over the last 25 years, we first had the invention of the internet, which made it possible for anybody to engage in one-to-many communication. Could put up a website very, very cheaply or free of charge, and anybody could come to it. That's a real transformation. Now, it's still difficult for people to find those websites. Why should I go to joeblogs.com rather than NewYorkTimes.com? But social media went a step further. It transformed our world from one-to-many communication to many-to-many communication. Now, if you're, take a particularly cute video of your dog, or you sit on a United Airlines flight and somebody decides to re-accommodate you, and you share that video with 100 followers on Twitter, if 10% of them retweeted, and 10% of them retweeted, and 10% of them retweeted, millions of people might see it in the course of an hour or two. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It allows the opposition in dictatorships to point out some of the shortcomings of a regime. It even empowers some important voices in our own societies that might otherwise not have broken through in the same way. Think of some of the brave kids in Parkland, Florida, who've become a real part of our national conversation in the last few months. But it also makes it much easier for people who are extremists and want to connect with each other, for people who have hateful views, for people who want to spread fake news, to connect and organize. And coming on top of the frustrations about the economy, or the fears about cultural change, that makes a very dangerous mix.